Welcome to Gold Silver Pros.
Hey everyone, this is Rob Kientz with Gold Silver Pros, and I have a returning guest, although it's been a long time since she's been on the program. It's Lynette Zang joining the program. Lynette, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Rob. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So you have now struck out on your own. You're now running Zang Enterprises, which is your own show. You're the president and CEO of that. Do you want to give a minute for our listeners and explain what you're doing?
Well, I'm doing everything that I knew needed to be done, and I finally have full freedom to do it. But what I focus is the mantra: food, water, energy, security, barterability, wealth preservation, community, and shelter. Because I've been studying currency life cycles, as you know, since 1987. So I'm quite clear on where we are. So we are not quite ready to start selling gold and silver yet, but we're working on it. So in the meantime, we're really focusing on the YouTube channel, The Lynette Zang. And I think people will like the new format and everything new that we're doing. It's very exciting.
Yeah, speaking for someone who went out on my own a couple of years ago and left corporate and developed a business, it can be exciting. It can be kind of crazy at times, but congratulations on it. It's a wonderful opportunity to kind of run your own business in the way that you want to do it. It gives you a lot of creative freedom, certainly. And so I'm looking forward to what you guys are going to be doing with your educational piece. And then, of course, when you get the bullion dealership up and running, that'll be awesome as well. I wanted to just jump right into what's going on because there is so much going on. It's almost like information overload for people.
Yes, it is.
And one of the things that you do really well is you kind of encapsulate the stuff that's going on, like at the political, cultural level, and in terms of what, how people should be looking at risk within the system. What's your view on risk in the system? And from your perspective, what's some of the top 2 to 3 risks that you see now?
Wow. Well, obviously, I think geopolitical risk, which is something that always surrounds a currency regime shift, which is where we are. We're shifting into a new system. And so what I'm seeing with war, although that's been evolving, that's a pretty big geopolitical risk. Also, the interest rate, the debt wall that's maturing, and it's not just the debt that won't be able to be rolled over. It's all of the derivatives, those big bet risks against that debt, because that's what's really going to overwhelm the system if they lose control of that, they being the bankers that create this garbage and oversee this garbage and can declare when there's a default, though I think that it could overwhelm these guys. And then I think also the shift to private equity. So taking a lot of this leverage, this debt and these risks and hiding it in a space that doesn't have to show what that debt, leverage and risk really is. And I'd say, those are my top 3.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about the third point here real quickly, because it seems as though a lot of the governmental functions have been privatized into companies, and as well as the finances being privatized in many ways. You have FASB 56, which kind of hides a lot of what's going on. But as you mentioned, a lot of it's going into the private side. Do people really have a real picture of what's going on with their government right now, given all of these, changes to what we traditionally would view as how the government runs things?
Yeah, I think people have no clue. And really, I never get political because it doesn't really matter to me what party is involved. There is a concise and steady movement to a one world currency, and therefore whoever controls the currency ultimately controls everything else. So I look at this as far more economic, and looking at the unelected officials, because the elected officials' job, in my opinion, is basically to legalize the theft of this side of the system. So look at the bankers, look at the central banks, because I think a big mistake that people make is that they assume, since it's the Federal Reserve, that they're part of the government, which of course they're not. Excuse me, nor do they hold reserves. And, how independent are they really? Or is it just an image of how independent they are? But when Nixon handed over control of inflation to central banks, he gave the whole show away. And, and what power do people have? I mean, really, we have to vote. What I'm calling for, Rob, really is a very peaceful revolution. And when you ask me, well, what can I do here? What's going to be different? I was lucky enough to get to go to Australia last August, September. And I found my voice there, and it's really about community. And that is such a huge thing because we don't have the luxury of time that I've had to build my urban farm or my bug out location. So local community is critical. Get to know who grows your food, get to know who supplies you the goods and services that you need, and create relationship with them so you can keep them going. But you can also bring what you have to the table and come together to be stronger in local community to survive this. I mean, look at Argentina, let alone Venezuela, let alone Turkey, let alone Egypt. And I mean, the list goes on of countries that are in crisis right now and hyperinflating. But globally, we have to have a seat at the table. And the only way that we as citizens will have a seat at the table to have a more fair monetary system rather than the total surveillance CBDC that is intended for us is by voting with your wallets and taking that wealth out of the system like you're doing, like you're helping people do, and what I'm helping people do. But it's in layers, right? It always depends on where we are in the trend cycle. And if you can learn how to recognize those patterns, then you can have a pretty good idea of where you need to be and what you need to be doing, whether it's preparing, really, I think we need to be as self-sufficient and independent going into this as possible. Or if the central bank says jump, you're going to have to say how high.
Yeah, it's a really good point. It goes beyond just finances. It goes to the network that you have. It goes to the resources that you have developed, outside of even where you may prepare with gold and silver or paying off debt and those types of things. It goes to having a community of people that are going to be local to you and support you. And I have a friend from the UK who keeps telling me, Rob, we need to go local. We need to go local. And he's absolutely correct, because if we don't go local with our needs, then you're beholden to the system. Because the system is what controls the movement of goods, the financing of all that. But when you have a local system developed, you kind of circumvent that national level policymaking or whatever roadblocks are going to be there. And you've developed, a way for like-minded people to participate in local economies. And that's where we have greater control anyway. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that I'm on the board of directors of Citizens for Sound Money. And one of the things that we are doing is trying to put legislation in the states to make gold money again. We got as far as creating bills and going to committee in Florida. We had support of both sides of the House, but one of the leaders of the House and the Senate on both sides, Democrat and Republican, but the leader of the House stopped the legislation because apparently they had conversations with some of the moneyed interests, and they said, hey, maybe we don't want to pass this legislation at this time, which wasn't a surprise. So we're going to come back to Florida, but we made a lot of progress. We have the support of the will of the people, and now we just need to put pressure on the leadership there in the Florida State Congress to get this passed. And this week we're in Missouri, facing the same challenges. So what we're doing is evolving and building, building like-minded people in various states to help us go and do this and to help us pass gold as money. But if we don't get that, we have to rely on our own wits and our own networks and things. So what do you suppose, Lynette, if somebody's, maybe they've invested a little bit of money in gold and silver, and now they're looking at what to do next, what would you suggest to them would be a good next step?
This is what I've done for myself. And I think that, how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? Mm-hmm. So, you step back and you look at where you're weak in all of the areas that you need to sustain a reasonable standard of living. Food, you got to have food. Mm-hmm. Or you're going to die, and water is too. You've got to have both of those things. So how secure are you in that? If you're not, Go to the local farmers markets. Even if you're in a big city, there are farmers markets. Get to know your farmers. Spend some time with these people so that if you need food or you need water, and, especially for people that live in a big city in the high rise, it's much harder to accomplish that. But food, water, energy, security, barterability, which for me is silver, wealth preservation, which for me is gold, community, which is golden. That's everything, because it can bring together those pieces that you lack, just like you can bring forth a skill set or an energy or whatever assets and talents you have to support the rest of the community. So I think community is probably the single most important thing to do. And then shelter, because you got to have a place to live. So, you step back from that mantra. This is how I did it anyway. And I said, well, where do I feel most vulnerable? And then I'd go and I'd work in that area a little bit until I didn't feel as vulnerable there. And then I would step back again and go, okay, well, where do I feel most vulnerable? And that's how I really developed having security in all of those areas around me. Certainly financial security, and certainly, with the movement in the States, ultimately, maybe we can force it. But I think if people, to support your states, legalizing gold and silver as legal tender, which, by the way, Rob, if you need me for anything, you know how to get a hold of me. Okay. But if you position into physical gold and silver, that's telling the government that you're recognizing that their garbage fiat, they don't want it, right? And it kind of forces and would help the issue a lot. But I recently looked at what was happening in the States, and I saw some really great progress, and that makes me feel really good, because in the Constitution, the individual is supposed to be atop of the heap, and then the state was supposed to support the individual, and then the federal government was supposed to support the states that was supposed to support the individual, and everything is flip-flopped. And it's a power grab, and we need to grab our power back.
We do, and that kind of, you talked about economic, that leads into Exer's pyramid and the economic. Not only has the government been flipped on its head and how we're doing it, but the valuation we put in society has been flipped on its head.
Yes.
At the bottom of Exer's pyramid is gold and silver, and that's really the facilitator of what you just said, the power of the people and the state supporting the people versus the power of the state telling the people what to do and not supporting them. And doesn't it all go back to having sound money? Isn't sound money freedom, essentially, what we're saying?
Well, exactly. And here's the other piece of this that is so critically important. I mean, if we go back to the beginning of this experiment, we could still walk in with a $20 bill to any bank and walk out with a $20 gold coin and create restrictions around the government. So the population had the power. They took that away from us in 33. They took it away from other governments in 71. We need to take that back. We need to go full circle. And so the new money that comes out, whether it's a CBDC like Zimbabwe's experiment with the gold-backed CBDC, but it's not convertible. How do you believe it? Even with the new bills that they just came out with and that have a component of gold, it's a step in the right direction. But how do you hold them accountable unless the system is based on a certain level of gold that they can't breach those debt levels and really inflate away the value of what we work for, which is money. It's got to be sound money, period.
It does. It sort of facilitates everything in getting into CBDCs. We've done our research on that, and I'd love to compare notes with you sometime. When I look at the BIS's representation of it, and then I look at things like Unit Foundation, it seems to me the evolution is to include gold up front, but then within 20 years sort of phase it out of the system. So I do think that they're piggybacking on gold for now. But absolutely. I think the ultimate statist position is to get rid of sound money so that they can control it. And they are modern monetary theorists or Keynesian, whatever you want to call it. Modern economics focuses on the power of the state. And to them, sound money doesn't matter. They want control of the money. but they think that they can control it through aggregate monetary supply and taxes and things like that. And that's never worked, has it, Lynette? I mean, we've tried this in the past, haven't we? And hasn't that failed every time?
Every single flippin' time without exception. And these are just a few currencies without exception. Yep. Thousands and thousands of times. Doesn't mean they're not going to keep trying, because really, if they have their way, meaning governments and central bankers, we will be back to the feudal system. I mean, everything goes around. Everything is in a circle. And when you realize that, and then you just take a look, I mean, we're talking about patterns that repeat every single time. And so if you understand what those patterns are, you go, oh, crap, that's where we are in this cycle. Now, you're never going to call the exact moment. And I don't think you really need to, but there's not one little doubt in my mind, having studied currencies and currency life cycles and looked at those patterns since 1987, we are at the end of this fiat money, the debt-based, the paper-based, I should say, system. And we're transitioning into a digital system, which gives them a whole lot more control unless we stand up and come together on a global basis. That's why my focus is totally on, not totally, because obviously we have to be able to survive this and talk about it, but community on a local basis, because when we go into hyperinflation, which personally, I believe we've already begun, we're at the beginning stages, really primarily based on the shift in monetary velocity, which we can talk about. But locally, because things get very local as hyperinflation kicks in. George Gammon just did a very interesting video going down to Argentina and trying to use Bitcoin, gold, and silver, in cafes there. He missed a little bit because of where we were in the trend cycle. But yeah, people want the goods and services, and you got to have sound money in order to buy them, because that has the broadest base of buyer. But globally, critically important for us to come together behind sound money, because I don't think one country is going to be able to fully pull it off, and it has to be convertible. Otherwise, there's really no way for us to check and hold the government's toes to the fire, the central bankers' toes to the fire. We need to take our power back, and sound money does that.
We do, and this has been great talking about the history of money and talking about that cycle. And it's important for people to recognize that cycle. So bringing it forward to where we are in the U.S. today, let's talk about the Fed and interest rates here for a minute. Powell just came out and said he's not seeing inflation go where he wants to before they do an easing cycle. And you and I both have the same opinion on the official CPI numbers. We think that they're really kind of garbage in terms of measuring real inflation. But even so, we've seen a tick up in the CPI the last couple of months, and it looks like we're getting into another inflationary cycle. Do you think that the Fed has any chance whatsoever of easing this year? Or I feel like they're between a rock and a hard place this year, but what are your thoughts on that?
First of all, they've been between a rock and a hard place since, 2008, significantly. But here's the thing, Rob. When they lower the interest rates, it's not because things are great. It's because they need more debt in the system, since it's a debt-based system. And it's an election year. I can't sit here and tell you whether they're going to ease or not ease, but what I can tell you, it's not going to matter what they do. That this inflation that they call sticky is because they're out of tools, right? You raise the rates like they've done and you break the economy, and there are a lot of delinquencies spiking, and the economy is definitely breaking no matter how much they talk about it. And they talk about tightening, right? They raise the rates, so that's supposed to tighten. But if you look at the from the Federal Reserve, and I can't remember what it's called right now, but it's monetary conditions, I think. And they never really got hard, except for the spike in 2020 for a minute, for just a heartbeat. So the conditions, when they're sitting here shocked that the economy is being so resilient, and consumers that have taken on even more debt that they can handle for sure, so resilient, it's really a joke. And like I said earlier, I've been watching the monetary velocity. That's the number, for viewers that aren't familiar with it, the number of times that money changes hands. And it's an indication of how stimulated the economy is. And since I think 1997, it's been going down. I mean, dropping very precipitously with an occasional bump up. So I've been watching that to indicate when we are entering the beginning of hyperinflation, when money changes hands very quickly, because that's what happens in hyperinflation. You get this fiat money, this government money in, and you want to get rid of it as quickly as possible. And so that speeds up and up and up. And if you look at that chart, the M2 velocity at the Federal Reserve's website, FRED, F-R-E-D, you'll see that it is spiked up in a very pervasive way. So that means that the money is changing hands very quickly, and that, I could be dead wrong, but in my opinion, especially when you're looking at this major pattern shift, those major pattern shifts mean something, whether you understand exactly what they mean or not. It means that something significant has shifted inside of the system, and you need to be very, very wary. So, I know that Wall Street hangs on, kind of, because they're definitely fighting the Fed these days, which is another big problem that creates, I mean, Rob, there's so many disconnects between the markets and the central bank and the Federal Reserve, but also between central banks globally and central banks, right? Where they used to walk in lockstep, raising rates the same, dropping rates the same, doing all the same monetary policy. That's not happening anymore either. So I'm seeing like a lot of decouplings and shifts and pattern shifts that are huge pattern shifts. Huge.
Yeah, it seems like the rest of the world's sort of disconnecting from the U.S. And you have the Belt and Road Initiative. You have the new networks forming around commodities trade. Africa and the Middle East are becoming big points of investment for the Chinese and the Russians and things like that. And it seems as though at the same time, it's hard for the U.S. to move its bonds. I think we had what I would consider a failed 10-year auction lately. And you have all of these countries dumping debt. And a lot of times the way they do it's very clever. They'll dump it without it being obvious. But you hear of the Chinese divesting of a lot of their assets in favor of commodities or gold or things like that. What is that eventually going to do? The dollar couldn't that be part of what's ticking up the velocity? Because of all those foreign dollars and foreign debts making its way back to America, wouldn't that have an effect on the overall monetary velocity and potentially be a contributor to a future hyperinflation?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that makes all the sense in the world, because again, it is the speed at which those dollars are changing hands. So we've been watching this for a while. I mean, truthfully, these things don't happen overnight until they happen overnight. So this shift away from the dollar has really been going on since '99 when they instituted the euro, where they thought that would take over as the world reserve currency. So yes, these shifts. What was it? Hemingway, when asked how he went bankrupt, what did he say? Slowly at first and then fast. And that's what we're seeing here. And there's definitely a shift away from the dollar. There's a shift for the SWIFT to become relevant again. But there's something else that in a very recent Bank for International Settlements report on the move toward the CBDCs is that the U.S., and this surprised me. I'm going to tell you, I missed this one. But that the U.S. is falling behind its other peers like the ECB and China's PBOC, etc. I think even India, there at Switzerland. I mean, they're amongst a bunch of developed nations, advanced economies. And where's the Fed in this? And where's the dollar in these tests? at the Bank for International Settlements, and they're saying the dollar's falling behind. What does that tell us? What does that, where's the Fed in all of this? Where's the dollar in all of this? What is that telling us, those of us that live in America? Because I'm sure you have a global audience, right? It tells me that we are absolutely losing that position. We have been slowly at first, and this is something that could happen very rapidly because, to your point, Rob, they are building the plumbing underneath the global financial system different than the SWIFT system, different than the US money market-based systems. And once that system is built, boom, they turn it on. We're done just that fast. Just that fast.
Yeah, that's correct. And, you know, the U.S. made it worse with sanctions on Russia because it allowed Russia to trade its oil in a different way and to utilize gold to protect its currency. And they started using Iran's wire system. And I mean, the sanctions forced the BRICS to say, okay, we need to build our own financial system, because if you're going to use it as a penalty against us, we have no choice. You know, they had no choice. It was just, it was a stupid decision by the U.S. pushing our trade partners off of our system and into their own. And at some point, Lynette, I think we're just going to be looking down going, where are all of our friends? Where are all the people that want to do business with us? Where are all the people that want, you know, to work with the United States? And we'd be sitting here by ourselves at some point going, what do we do? And then that goes back into the preparation side. And I want to talk a little bit more about preparation and kind of bring this full circle. If you're a person wanting to prepare, you know, there's an interesting read that came out recently called The Great Taking, which yes. I know you and I talked about years ago. When I came down to Phoenix 4 or 5 years ago, you and I were talking about these concepts before that paper ever come out. You had done a really good video on, do you really own your bank account? Do you really own a lot of these things? And I had done some of that work as well. And it's cool seeing it now put into a publication like that that's kind of gone viral. But haven't these things been taking place for a long time, where your ownership of what you think you own in this fiat system has actually been swept away from you? And even if you have $100,000 in your bank account, is it really your money? You know, if you have money in your pension fund, is it really your money? If you have money in your Charles Schwab account, is it really your money? Talk a little bit about that risk and where, you know, is gold and silver the answer to that, or what is the answer to that situation?
Well, JP Morgan actually said it best. What did he say? He said, only gold is money, everything else is credit. And so all of these products, and they do it so invisibly, because they know when they make these shifts, they really don't want you to understand what they're about. But yes, you know, in 1995, they created those sweep accounts that gave the banks the right, and you kind of look at where we were inside of the monetary velocity inside the system in 95, they needed to create more leverage, right? So they legalized the fact that the banks could sweep your deposits into sub-accounts in their names and then use your equity as collateral. But that's true for stocks, for bonds. If they're held, actually, if you don't hold it, you don't own it. What can I say? Because everything else is counterparty risk. Everything else is a contract. And you didn't read those contracts. You didn't write those contracts. So whose best interest are they going to be written for? It's not your money. You know, I mean, what is it? It's, well, I can't read this because it's in Vietnamese, but basically, you know, the money is a debt instrument that's owned by the Federal Reserve that does not, at this moment anyway, charge interest or pay interest, right? So, right, it is a perception, and they have a team, the government has a formal team of perception management, because if they can manage how you perceive things, then they can manage, or they have a much better shot at managing how you move forward. I'm saying take the blinders off. Read their own words. Don't take my word for it. Don't take Rob's word. Don't take their word for it, because they don't have your best interest at heart. Their job is to legalize the theft, right? And to have this wealth transfer happen so invisibly that you don't complain. I mean, I mean, what is their definition, central bank's definition of price stability? It's not that the price of an apple stays the same over time. You and I would think, oh, well, price stability, the price stays the same. No, no, no. It's that the price goes up at a slow enough increment that you don't notice and you don't ask for more money from your boss. And you continue on with your lifestyle like we've seen, taking on debt to just maintain a standard of living, when the reality is this is a game and the chips are stacked against us, pie flipping design, because they knew that people don't understand inflation. But when Powell and Christine Lagarde came out and said, well, we don't really understand inflation. I mean, since they're the ones that are driving the inflation bus, don't you think that's a little scary?
It is, and wasn't it Henry Ford who said if people really understood how the financial system worked, there'd be a revolution overnight? Because it's basically leading into financial slavery. And one of the last topics I want to talk about was how do we get people out of that thinking? Because if you look at the aggregate numbers, people are using credit cards like never before. There are buy now, pay later plans that came out over the holiday season. So did we really have all of that, those sales and that economic activity, or was it all just based on debt? It seems like the people, as they've been entrapped in the system, when we get to the end of it, that they're now living off of debt and basically are becoming debt slaves to some degree. How do people get out of that? What's the best way to sort of get out of that cycle and say, okay, I need to get out of this debt-based cycle. I need to live within my means. I need to invest securely. What's the easiest way for people to do that? It's a very complex system, and you and I talk about it, but what are some easy things that people can do to say, okay, I realize there's a problem, I don't want to end up this way. What changes can I make?
Well, I'm going to say, first of all, come back to community, because you can, like, if somebody comes here and volunteers on the farm, they take home food. So that can save you on grocery bills. If you get involved in like community gardens, you're more likely to meet like-minded people. And food is the biggest issue for most people during these transitions. So you want to cut back your expenses where you can. And also, the big problem is if you're carrying credit card debt, it's hard to get out of that, because if you're not paying it off every month, you might not even be paying off the interest on it. So parts of the interest are going underneath it. If you can transfer that into a fixed rate, any variable rate debt. Okay, let me kind of back up, take a breath. Okay. The government's plan for fixed rate debt is to repay that debt with dollars that have no value, right? Or less and less value over time, and ultimately no value. Well, the strategy that I developed is actually based on that government strategy. So if you have credit card debt and you can somehow move it into some kind of fixed rate debt and then balance out your portfolio with severely undervalued gold, when they do those overnight resets and they take something that has no value and they revalue it against something that's all value, then gold will start to move toward its true fundamental value. But I'm not going to wait. I'm not looking for a top. So when they do that first revaluation, personally, and I will tell people that are watching me when I'm doing this for myself, I will liquidate however much gold I need to bam, pay that debt off. So if you want to get out of debt and you've got credit card debt, and then don't use those credit cards more than what you can pay off on any given day, but also why not vote with some level of cash as well? Because cash is your very first line of defense. So, but not in the banks, because what do you do if the banks close or the banks limit you to, $40 a day or $200 a day, or however they're going to limit you. So, what do people do? You look at what you need to be as self-sufficient and independent as possible. And again, you start to plug those holes. If you don't have gold and silver, start to accumulate gold and silver. But you also need to make sure that you can get that food and that water and that energy. There are, no matter where you are, there are ways for you to accomplish those top 3 things. You want your refrigerator to keep running, so you can do like a small, either a small solar system, which is the best because then that's renewable. But that's what you have to do, you know. And as far as getting out of debt, you got to move it to fixed rate, not add to it, but buy the right amount of gold that you need so that when they do that reset, we don't know what that coverage is going to be. But in Venezuela, it went up like 3,500% overnight or something like that. And we just saw a 50% devaluation in Argentina, right? So when that happens, you take advantage of it and you pay that fixed rate debt off. But get that, I mean, I'd say at this point, critical, get that moved over into fixed rate debt and then balance out your portfolio with gold, with the intention of paying that debt off when the first reset. Don't look for a top. Just that first reset happens, get it done, because everything is a contract and everything is in jeopardy.
All right, last question for him. I'll leave this open-ended. Anything we haven't talked about that you want to address with the viewers? Something recent that you found or something that's important that you want to emphasize?
Well, I think we've really covered a lot, but I did want to ask you one little question. Okay. Since central banks and governments need big crisis to cover up and justify the shift, do you think that it is possible that all of these missteps that we're sitting here watching, and these are supposed to be the smartest guys in the room, do you think that this is coincidental, or how do you feel about these missteps? Intentional, or?
I think that governments need to go to war sometimes to kind of cover some of this up. And whenever the monetary system ages, and I'll give you an example. I graduated my master's from a military university. It was Norwich University. And I was one of 2 private citizens in there. And most of my classmates were forward serving in the military or their Homeland Security or CIA or these agencies. And it was a remote program, but one of the requirements is we go to college for a week of residency. We had to bring a thesis and defend it, and then meet our classmates and graduate. Condoleezza Rice was our graduation speaker, and we had a lot of people involved in government attending this week, this residency week at Norwich as guests. So one of the sessions I went to, I show up in the church there at Norwich University, and I forget what country it's from, but we had an ambassador from one of the European countries. We had the university president in there, and it was this very somber mood. And I thought, what's going on? It's supposed to be, a happy time. We had this 2-hour conversation about war. This is in 2014. And in 2014, they were saying, we're going to have a world war. It's probably going to involve Eastern Europe and the Middle East. And I got the feeling it would be within 10 to 15 years. They didn't explicitly say that, but that was exactly 10 years ago. And a lot of my military friends sort of under the table when I was at the conference were trying to warn me. And that's when I really woke up. I had bought gold and silver years and years ago, but that's when I woke up and effectively started prepping, doing the water and the shelter thing that you're talking about, because I knew ahead of time because of my contacts, with my university, that we were going to go to war. And I was going to say funny. It's not funny. It's alarming that the wars that we're in now or the wars that were called during that meeting when I graduated with my master's. It was in cybersecurity at that military university, and that everybody was talking about it. The fact that they called where it was going to happen, the fact that they called the general time frame that it was going to happen. And, last year I wrote a blog article on that, and I thought, oh my God, this is actually going to come true. This was a real warning. Yeah. And so I think that some things, I don't know if they're preordained, but I think some things occur because governments want them to occur. And I think it's very possible, that the conflicts that geopolitical conflicts that we're getting, one is a result of our unsound money system, but 2, the result of the government trying to retain power any way it can. Yes. And unfortunately, the United States has taken the war path versus the economic trade path. And I think it's the wrong path that we're going down. But I think the die is set. I think we're going down that way because it's just, it's the way the government wants to go. But I kind of knew ahead of time. I knew it was coming. And it's, it's scary, but it's the way that a lot of nation states, when you look at Sir John Glubb's research, I've talked about this on my channel, he researched 3,000 years of history, and he said most advanced nation states get to this point, and it's around 250 years. And guess what? We're about 250 years since our Declaration of Independence. And it's about time that the U.S. kind of goes through this stage. And that report, I think, was called something about nation. I call it The Rise and Fall of Nations. He was talking about the life cycle of nations. But he wrote that in 1971. And he was saying this happened to England, where he was from. And guess what? It may be coming to America. And that's exactly what we're seeing. So I do think that history tends to repeat itself. And I do think that when governments make the wrong choices, this is where we go. And I think it's important for the people to understand that and to understand the history of that. Much like we understand monetary history, we have to understand political and cultural history, because they go hand in hand. And it's important to understand those things. And as we go through these scary times, Iran and Israel fighting each other, and the wars in Ukraine, stuff like that, we need to understand history and realize that these things repeat and they can happen, and to prepare for that. Because if we do end up going to a broader war, this time I'm a little bit afraid because of the scale of the weapons we have. That what you're talking about, your localized economy, your community, your water, and your power are going to be as important as anything else going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. So, but you know what you did, and this is what I really hope that everybody does. Number one, you believe the words instead of just going into denial. Oh no, that can't happen here, which is what a lot of people do. And you took action, right? So that's been my quest for so long. First, it was, how can I explain this in a way that people can understand it? And I think I do that fairly well. But then it became, wait a minute. All right, they understand it, but they don't believe it. And therefore they don't take action, and they remain vulnerable. So, I'm glad that you said what you said, because that points out that you heard this, you believed it, you took it to heart, and you actually did something to protect yourself. And what people don't know is they always think they're going to know it, 1 second before it happens, and they're going to have the opportunity and the time to get into position. It doesn't work like that, right? The time to prepare is now, right? The time to prepare is 100 years ago, a year ago. I mean, I went to my bug out location after COVID hit, and I'm walking around my urban farm, which I started in 2010 after I found this property and I knew the system died. And I'm feeling pretty proud of myself. I'm like, grocery store shelves bare. That doesn't bother me. I have lots of food. I had enough to share. I had lots of toilet paper. I had stuff that I could share. But there were riots near my home and near my children's home, and we both live in nice neighborhoods. And I thought, no. When I slept in my bed with a gun that night, I was not comfortable. So, I'm grateful that that was a warning, and I hope people took heed of that warning, because you're talking about, you get this warning, you got to do something about it, because you're seeing the next most likely outcome, right? I mean, those grocery store shelves have not recouped. They're not full like they were. So you have to take heed, do something about it. I now have a completely off-grid property. It took me about maybe a year and a half to find it, because I wanted something very remote, large enough that I could create and establish a community. So that's what I've been doing for the last, I guess, two or 3 years, have been, creating an environment up there to house and feed and take care of 40 people in the community with a variety of skill sets, right? If I don't need it for that purpose, I'm telling you, that's my happy place. I go up there, it's remote, it's gorgeous, and I get to just relax and enjoy it. But if I need it to get out of town, because desperate people do desperate things, desperate governments do desperate things, well, guess what? It's close. I can get there. I can walk. I mean, it'd be a really, 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 really long walk, but I could walk there. If we had to walk there, we've got a place that has all of those things: food, water, energy, security, barterability, wealth preservation, community, and shelter. Everything. Get it done. You don't have time. I don't believe that you have time like I've had that luxury and been working on it for so long. That's why you got to be local community, but global community is equally important, because we got to have a say at the table. And if we don't try, we don't have a shot. At least if we try and if we work on it and we come together and make a positive impact for a lot of people around the world, and we vote with our wallets, we got a shot.
Yeah, we still have a shot, and that's the key thing to remember. Storm clouds are forming, but there are sunny days, and to hold on to those sunny days and hold on to our principles. Because if you give up or you're not participating, you're effectively giving over power, and we don't want to do that. We don't want to give over power. We want to retain our personal power and our community power. And so congratulations to you, Lynette, for building that community. It's a wonderful thing that you did. And even if you don't have the money to go to an alternative location, if you're a little bit lower budget, there's still things that you can do to build your community locally. And I think the more resilient we are locally, the better shot you got at, surviving whatever's coming our way. And so I think that's a hugely important point to make.
100%. 100%.
So, Lynette, thank you so much for coming on. I'm so glad that you did. Sorry we missed you last time. That was my fault. But glad you were able to make it to the program. Love to have you on again if you're willing to do that.
Anytime. This is community. We're all in the same boat together. Let's row together. We will get there. We have a lot more power when we do that. So that's the way I view it. And yeah, I'm happy to. And I'll have
awesome. So
as well, Rob.
Okay, great. So you can find Lynette Zang under Lynette Zang on YouTube. And where else can we find you, Lynette?
Twitter, the Lynette Zang, Instagram and Facebook at Lynette Zang. But stay tuned. By the end of this month, our website will be up. It may not be fully completed, but it will be up. And and we're moving into incredible new offices. I don't have a date on that just yet, but a lot of moving parts.
Awesome. Well, congrats on that. Thank you so much for joining the program, and we'll talk to you again.
Absolutely. Thanks.